Proxy person.
Hanson Senator.
Here.
And Vice President.
Here.
Vice Senator. Will Rice President. Proxy. Will Rice Senator.
Here.
Baker President.
Here.
Baker Senator.
Here.
Sid President.
Here.
Sid Senator. Here. Lovett President. Proxy. Lovett Senator. Here. Okay, Jones President. I'm here. Jones Senator.
Here.
Brown President.
Proxy.
Brown Senator. Here. McMurtry President.
Here.
McMurtry Senator. Duncan President. Here. Duncan Senator.
Yep.
Martell President.
Aye.
Martell Senator. Here. Ready to see anybody?
Alright, is there a motion to approve minutes?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Great. So RSVP asked us to reduce their blanket tax, and then literally 4 hours before it was going to go on the ballot, they asked to remove it. So no, that's not on the agenda. So I've never actually seen this yet, so it's magical legislation. But Louis, Chris, and Nathan are going to introduce to approve the food wrap and SMR position. I don't know if there's like a copy of that I can pull out, but I don't have it.
You want to just
You can come up and talk about it, and we can, if I can pull it out, if it has to. Someone will email you.
We sent the essay. Well, if we can't bring it up tonight, we'll send in Olivia's email with the minutes. I guess to get started, basically the idea of the legislation is to standardize the food rep position, and to a lesser extent SMR. Housing Dining is already sort of taking steps to improve the SMR position and make it a bit more standardized across the colleges. So the main gist of the legislation is to standardize the food rep position to a greater degree, because it's sort of like hit or miss, not only across colleges, but just from year to year, whoever holds the position. So the legislation just sets some things that we'd like to see become standardized within the food rep position, as far as like the applications, as well as like obligations of like meeting with the senior operation manager every month and different things like that.
I guess the only thing I would add is it's mostly because the food rep position is pretty variable at all the colleges. They're not always held liable for holding up their position. Some colleges don't have a food rep that actually talks to the chefs. It's pretty bad, so we want to change that. And this program will basically give them more opportunities to speak with the chefs, speak with senior operations managers, and SMRs to a lesser extent. Basically what Nathan said. In terms of the selection process, some people might be concerned about, okay, does this take power away from the colleges? I believe what we're proposing is that the colleges will still have a say in the selection processes as they do now. The H&D will kind of review those selections.
Yeah, so I mean, the colleges would still be responsible for like reviewing and picking applicants, and then this would just make sure that H&D sort of gives like a stamp of approval for whoever they pick. And like there'll be some like extra requirements, like making sure that whoever's food rep has like an on-campus full meal plan, so like they're invested and will have regular contact with where they serve.
And I think probably the other big points people might be concerned about, the SMR position, as of now, will remain a paid position, but the food rep position will not be, as it currently stands.
Yeah, no change.
When we talked to H&D, they didn't want to make any changes in that regard.
Yeah.
So you guys are working under the assumption that a food rep exists at every college, and they don't. Some colleges have kitchen reps in place of food reps, and some colleges don't have food reps at all. So my only concern with this is that it would be creating a new position and creating it standardized, but not every college needs it in that way. And it seems to infringe upon college government in the fact that like it's bureaucratically picked from the college, but approved by the H&D.
Wait, so the kitchen reps, I know like Jones have a kitchen rep or kitchen line.
We don't. Love it.
Oh, so it's not just for like the kitchens that like the student kitchens where they cook. It's actually for the servers.
I have absolutely no clue.
Oh.
Because that's what I'm saying. Like what they do is very different from what Jones does. And so like my only concern is that standardizing it might not help
So
things.
what I would say to that is the position of food rep, like as it is through this legislation, gives a lot of freedom in the respect of the position, so we're not like infringing on anything that way. Like if there's something you do with as a kitchen rep that food reps don't normally do, then you're free to continue doing that. The legislation will only like standardize the minimum amount of things you need to do just so that people are doing what the position was intended for. And I think even just like adding that to say kitchen rep position, I mean I personally don't know what they do specifically, but it wouldn't put a burden on me because it's not like a very strong commitment that we're asking for.
And I think something H&D would like to see is a position like this at all the colleges. When we have spoken with them on multiple occasions, that's something that they really like to see.
I mean, pretty much the like genesis of like how we started thinking about this is just making communication across all the colleges with H&D more consistent. So at least we personally think that having a position like this that necessarily has to communicate with H&D at each college would be a good thing because they know like who they can talk to about certain things.
Yeah. Well, so I see like where you're coming from, especially like I assume that you're kind of linking it to what the eco-rep does similarly, like where they are picked by the college, but they have campus-wide meetings with FEP and the sustainability office. But they so our food rep does not have a budget, and that's the only reason why the eco-rep has the actual ability to go and meet with FEP is because they get a budget from them. If that makes sense.
Yeah, so I don't see that as like a prerequisite for this position or this legislation because the purpose of like a food rep in general is to communicate what students want at their serveries or at their cafeterias, whatever you want to call it. And so I don't think a budget would be necessary, but it's still like very important they're communicating with H&D in this position because if you appoint a food rep and then they don't really do much else the rest of the semester, they're not really fulfilling that role. So the only thing that this legislation is really ensuring is that they're staying on top of their obligations and that they are communicating what the college wants.
Yeah, we have time for one more question.
What would the H&D like stamp of approval process look like? I mean, I just feel like that's. I mean, it just kind of sounds like H&D getting handsy on.
Well, just to clarify, that was something that we brought to them, and they were sort of surprised. They were of the impression that they didn't want to intrude at all on what the colleges were doing. But I mean, it'd basically just be meeting with like the officials that the food rep would be meeting to, with the food rep would be meeting throughout the year, and just making sure that it's something that they could work with. And again, verifying that they'll have a full meal plan. Basically, it'd be very easy to meet the requirements. It's not like something where they'd be rejecting applicants regularly at all, I'd imagine.
One question for Brian. I would just comment that maybe H&D getting handsy is not that bad of a thing.
So I get the whole college sovereignty thing when it applies to like sort of bigger issues at the college, like how a college should decide on housing or their president or their other executive officers, but I don't see the college sovereignty argument for a food rep. I think this is a good idea. It makes sense to have a functioning food rep at every college, and I don't see that as like this horrific infringement on the colleges and telling them that, you know, you should probably have someone in this position that's useful in doing something.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
I think
Next up, we have Trent, who's introducing a piece of, I think it's a resolution, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not as built.
Yeah. Resolution.
Should all DNSRs on this task force come up? Put your name for bills stuff.
Shoot, everyone's
All right, hi guys. This is basically an effort to look at the Rights Education of the Future initiative, say, yay, good job, these findings are important, administration look at it, let's find a way to sustain these efforts going forward. So the beginning section just kind of looks at our initiative, breaks it down, and then the be result statements kind of call it successful, thank the team, and then get into the serious stuff of like laying out the key, most popular recommendations and asking that the administration, board of trustees, and risk community as a whole looks at it carefully and kind of considers it seriously in decision-making processes. So, yeah, apologize for not getting this to everyone earlier, but especially near the, I guess, the be resolved statements, if you guys have any feedback. Basically, I want this to be as effective as possible and not be like some legislative fluff. But I think we're all aware that the administration does look at these documents quite seriously. So,
Just a quick question. So what exactly are the next steps to make this more of a tangible thing, right? So I mean, everything sounds really great, and all of the feedback that you get from the students is directly from the students, which is what we want. But how are we going to make that real?
yeah, so the way to make it real is to take this resolution and take the actual report that we made and sit down with President LeBron, a bunch of administrators, and board of trustee members. And Robbie and I are like organizing that in the upcoming weeks and months. And when we sit down with them, we'll get a much better idea for, of these 11 recommendations, here are the top ones, administration, people at the table, what do you think of them? And then if we could be strategic about thinking about the ones that they like and things that they can actually put on the priority list and invest resources in, we can set up teams around those key ideas that are most likely to move forward, while also setting up some kind of infrastructure to have this general conversation continue on a yearly basis, as well as keep track of recommendations that the administration is not willing to address in the short term. So basically, meet with them, set up action teams, and then put mechanisms in place to make this sustainable. But the whole goal is to make this as real as possible. Otras ideas? Anything else? Cool. Thanks, guys.
Alright, so now we're going to go on to voting. The first, so we have two pieces of legislation open from 2 weeks ago. The first is the Midshipman housing legislation. So if anyone has any outstanding comments for discussion, we can talk about that, or we can go directly to the vote. Any thoughts? Alright, so then we can go to the vote. So yeah, obviously only text this if you're voting members.
Keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Wait, sorry. Yeah, it's gonna be text.
Wait, what's up?
Yeah, how do you vote yes or no?
That's a really good question. Oh, do we have to make it active?
They updated it but made it worse.
Robbie.
Can we just do a roll call vote?
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna try for like 2 seconds.
Just by her.
How do we make it active?
Can we do a roll call?
Yeah, let's do roll call.
Yeah, okay, we're gonna roll call this one.
Now.
Wait, okay, can we do the robot? Technology is stupid.
Alright, so your options are yay, nay, or abstain. You just call it out when I call your position. So president here. Or as a president. IDP, Ali. Yes. Rita. Here. Me. Joe. Nitin. Or Keith. Or Will Rice Senator.
Abstain.
Will Rice Senator.
Abstain.
Hanson Senator.
Yeah.
Weiss Senator. Jones Senator.
Yay.
Brown Senator. Lovett Senator. Wait, Brown was that a yay or a nay? Nay. That was a nay, sorry. Sid Senator. Yay. McMurtry Senator.
Yay.
Duncan.
Which one?
Senator. Martell Senator. Yay. All right, presidents. Baker President.
Nay.
Will Rice President. Yay. Hanson President.
Yay.
Weiss President.
Nay.
Jones President. Yay. Brown President.
Nay.
Lovett President. Nay. Yay or nay? Nay. Sid President.
Nay.
Martell President.
Nay.
McMurtry President.
Abstain.
And Duncan President.
Yay.
Yay.
The resolution fails to pass. All right, so the second is on the SA40A recommendation from last week, 2 weeks ago. Any questions? Cool, let's go.
All right. Abby Proxy. Joe. Oh, yay. Baker Senator.
Yay.
Will Rice Senator.
Yay.
Hanson Senator.
Yay.
Rice Senator. Jones Senator.
Yay.
Brown Senator. Yay. Lovett Senator. Yay. Sid Senator. Yay. McMurtry Senator.
Yay.
Duncan Senator. Martell Senator. Yay. And Baker President.
Yay.
Will Rice President.
Yay.
Hanson President.
Yay.
Vice President.
Yay.
Jones President.
Yay.
Brown President.
Yay.
Lovett President. Yay. Sid President.
Yay.
And Martell President.
Yay.
And McMurtry President.
Yay.
Duncan President.
Yay.
All right.
Yay.
Yay.
Great, so that passes with flying colors. So next up are Jazz and Jacob talking about their work on the parking standing committee. So I think last time we talked, there's a lot of exciting developments with parking at Rice, and they've been representing your opinion vigorously. So.
Okay, so obviously we went into this year with a lot of things on the agenda for parking, and it's been a very secretive road because they're really strict about confidentiality, but officially today we can announce that there has been approval for a parking garage going on Lovett Lot.
Garage before we all
I'm sure there's going to be 1,000 questions, but one other good announcement before then. Another issue people were talking about in parking. Another issue people were talking about in parking was restructuring the fees to make more sense. And I met with the parking manager yesterday, who could not have been more pleasant and encouraging and optimistic about helping Rice students do that. He also agrees that it has to be restructured, but he's not willing to get an outside consultant to do it. Because he says that those people, they don't have the Rice experience. The people who know Rice are the Rice students, so he wants us to be the consultants. So he's especially calling economics majors, stat majors, anyone who has a vested interest in restructuring the parking rates, he's open to meeting with and talking about new plans. So currently we're looking for people to fill those positions right now. And hopefully within the next very short few weeks, we can actually get some proposals out there to him. So, questions, please.
First off, y'all are awesome. That's awesome. But just a question, is it the lot right behind Lovett College or the Lovett lot right in front of McMurtry?
Thank you.
It's a Lovett lot by Lovett College.
Okay.
Who gets to park in this parking
Okay, so
garage?
obviously parking on campus, the best spots go to the people who have the most, power, if you want to say that. So obviously a lot of faculty are going to get the first spots. But it's not to say students won't be able to park there. Just first come first.
Students will be able to park there during the evenings as well, so they'll be more on campus, like centrally located parking spot, and weekend parking spot.
There's also a 50-50 chance that we're going to get office space at the same building. It was great because that'll break some of the off-campus office space that we're actually bringing on campus and reduce our costs.
Like payroll.
How tall will the parking garage be? Like, will it?
It's 4 stories, 500 spots.
Yeah. So it's going to be 4 stories with a covered roof, and it's going to be about the same size as
Allen Hall?
yes.
So right now,
It's right next to the house. Yes.
So you talk about getting representatives. I know looking for a certain number of people. Do you want them to apply and talk with you guys before talking to parking? Or is it going to be unstructured?
Yeah, so it'll be a structured committee. So we'll send out some emails and get people to sign up. We're not putting a cap on how many people can help. We're just gonna look at interest and then figure out from there.
do you know why they chose Lovett Lot out of all the lots?
It's centrally located on campus, and so I think there's multiple proposals out, and that was the most cost effective. So building parking spaces is incredibly expensive, and nobody wants to put their name on it. So that made sense as the best place to do it, where it wouldn't be expensive. Like there's other proposals to like expand other underground parking spots or build new underground parking spots, but it's like orders of magnitude more expensive than alternatives.
Another good thing is that they're also going to widen that entrance side of it. So anybody that lives in the South College knows it's hell trying to get around that corner. So it's going to be about twice as big.
What's the timeline?
We're looking anywhere from like 1 to 3 years. We've just moved into the design phase. So if you're a senior here, you probably won't see it, but if you're a freshman, maybe.
You probably do this.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Any other questions? Okay. Look forward to getting some interesting responses from your colleges.
Alright, so next Brian has UCORT constitutional amendment, multiple of them to present.
So, we have 2 things to do. These are emailed out. Okay. So at some point they need to be emailed out to members of the Senate so that you guys can review them, because half of it can be approved by the Senate, which are the amendments to our bylaws and procedures. Those just need a vote of UCORT, which has already happened, and the Senate. The constitutional amendments have to go on the ballot, so what we're asking the Senate to do is approve them for a referendum, like we do with other subsidiary organizations, constitutions. Basically, these aren't substantive amendments. We're expanding our mission and purpose to better encapsulate what we do, not just as a court that hears judicial cases, but also as representatives of the student body with regard to judicial matters. So that's probably the most substantive change is revamping the statement of mission and purpose. Mostly everything else is just some technical fixes, whether those are brought on by things having been written 5 years ago, brought on by the changes in the Code of Student Conduct, and brought on by the new SA Constitution that was ratified last spring. So it's mostly just cleaning up the document and making sure that it's clear and that it reflects what our procedures are, and that it agrees with the Code of Student Conduct, especially in light of revisions. Like the code, it has for the years referred to an assistant dean that no longer exists. So it's mostly things on the technical level that we're changing. Last year, we introduced initial meetings in all cases because SJP started referring cases directly rather than meeting with most students before sending them to us. So there's some codification of those procedures, but it's not a substantive change in them. And obviously, we can send out the legislation that fully lists the amendments. I'm happy to answer any questions. You can email us at uport@rice.edu if you have questions. I will go through all of the details with you, but I promise we're not like changing the judicial system in any serious way. I would note, so a couple other substantive changes is we're proposing removing the term limit on the UPort chair because it's currently term limited to 1. No, I'm graduating, I'm not running again. But we just thought that was a little silly, especially if we end up electing someone who is not a senior to be chair, that the student body would be prohibited from choosing the best candidate. You can always just not vote for someone. And then previously it was unclear what it meant to be in good judicial standing for purposes of membership on the court. We've clarified that to mean that you have to have completed any outstanding sanctions, and also that if you've been found in violation of abuse of the university judicial system, the most common cause of which is lying to us, you cannot then, the next year after that's still on your record, but not in the current year, be a member of the court that you've been found to have lied to. So that's something that we found was important as a restriction. Yeah, everything else was.
Yeah, and we'll email the rest of it out.
Are there any questions?
Perfect. On to the next one. Next up we have the teacher who is doing something similar. They might be pulling a fast one on us. I don't know.
Mine.
Okay, so I don't know if you know me, I'm Miles, I'm the editor-in-chief of the Pressure. So basically we're trying to do the same thing Ron's doing, except ours is a little bit broader, I guess. So our Constitution is basically really old, we have no idea when it was written, and it's really poorly written. So we took it upon ourselves to write a new one, and I mean, besides adding a lot more about our organizational structure, there's a few more procedures that we've implemented for, like, for instance, the selection of editor-in-chief, the removal of editor-in-chief, and a few other things. But essentially, we've made it now that the editor-in-chief must be approved by 3/4 of the editorial board before they're put up for a general election. And before, also, the procedure for removing the editor-in-chief was that they had to go through the student association for that to happen, and we've written it into our new constitution that can be done by a vote by the editorial board. So these are the main substantive changes, but feel free to look at it, ask questions. Yeah.
So given that there's a general requirement on subsidiary organizations to have an elected leader, how did you reach the 3/4 requirement, and how does that maintain the spirit of satisfying the requirement of having an elected leader and only placing reasonable requirements on candidacy?
Okay, right. So let me clarify a little bit. There can be multiple candidates for editor-in-chief. They must have originally served on the Thresher for a year, and basically each candidate must be elected by 3/4. And again, I mean, like, this is a kind of a rough guideline, but basically the current editor-in-chief is going to strive to ensure that at least one candidate is elected by 3/4 of the editorial board. So, like, each year this discussion will happen, and each year the editor-in-chief will make sure that 3/4 is elected.
What's to prevent this from being used as a method of only ever allowing one candidate? So right now, if you have a certain amount of experience on the Thresher, you can run, which means that if you disagree with the way that the Thresher is currently being run, and maybe you've left for a year or something, you can come back and run as long as you were in good standing while you were there in your experience. And that sort of makes sense for a student media organization. But what you're saying now is that you need 3/4 of the current staff to approve you to run, which means that if at least 1/4 of the current staff decides that they only want to ever put forward a single candidate, that is, that they want to elect the editor-in-chief themselves, rather than allowing the editor-in-chief to be elected by the student body, it only takes 1/4 of the editorial staff to restrict there from being more than one candidate.
All right, so Miles, you have 30 seconds to respond to that, and then all conversation can be taken offline between you two.
So I understand that concern, but I want to make it clear that this process is a lot more transparent than what we had before. Before, the editor-in-chief was basically just selected by the past editor-in-chief.
But anyone could run.
Okay, technically, sure.
Technically, under the rules that were in place, or that are in place right now, I could file to run if I wanted to.
But I mean, I think the Thresher decided that if we wanted only one candidate to run in 3/4, more than 3/4 decided that was fine, that's our right to do that as well. So.
Despite the constitutional requirement that you have an elected leader by the student association rather than by the Thresher.
But that doesn't mean, they're still elected by the student association. It's just that
Not if
only
it's-
one candidate's allowed to run.
Check yes or yes.
Also, I just believe that the Thresher editorial board will better be able to select which candidates to run than the student body.
So you disagree with the requirement that there be an elected leader, period?
I think the 30 seconds is up, yeah.
Yeah. So we can take that conversation offline.
Yeah, no.
If you have questions, talk to Miles. We'll be emailing out both of those constitutional amendments to you. So this one's actually exciting. So Nick and Co. of the craft team have their proposal to
Let's go, Phil Pickle.
All right, so we presented at the beginning of December about a new proposed model called the Pot of Gold model for blanket tax, and most of the community members are actually in this room. So Miles, Zach, Brian, Joan, and myself have been working really hard along with some staff people to flesh out the details of that and create a new system that we have draft language for to put on the ballot. So to just kind of flesh out the key points of this, we talked in early December that the new system, because we're creating this initiative fund, necessitates raising the overall fee levied on students because we can't really cannibalize existing organizations, and if we don't cannibalize existing organizations without raising the fee, then we won't have an initiative fund. So we're proposing raising the overall fee to $85. Currently, students, disregarding the $20 that is kind of just a pass-through for intramurals, pay $79. So this would be a $6 increase, leading to approximately a $22,000 initiative fund, and then also leave room for organizations that aren't currently blanket taxed that would be added. Because a key feature of this system is that for organizations to become subsidiary organizations in the future, it would kind of just be a yay-nay vote on their access to the funding and an annualized process and priority access to the initiative fund, versus you are applying to be a subsidiary organization, and that also at the same time simultaneously necessitates an increase in the fee. So we're kind of separating out those processes so that we can make sure worthy organizations get funded without people getting too hung up on the dollar sign involved with the legislation. So, so we're proposing raising the overall fee. We've kind of fleshed out how this annual budgeting process for subsidiary organizations, which are currently called blanket tax organizations, Thresher, UCORT, Honor Council, etc., how that would work. So at the end of every academic year, they would submit a budget proposal to our standing committee, and this budget proposal would combine a quick review of last year's financial performances. So what did you spend compared to what was your budget, along with a proposed budget for next year that includes line items. So here's where we're going to spend the money, and here's how much money we're requesting from essentially this overall pool of $85 times as many undergraduates as there are. The standing committee then can work with the organization. There's upfront agreement on what the spending policies will be versus everybody having small arguments after the fact about why the money was spent in certain places, even though we can't do anything about it anymore. And so that process would happen in April so that organizations have budgets that line up with the Rice fiscal year, which is July to July. So that you would still get money twice a year because that's when student fees are charged to students and raised by the cashier and then redistributed to organizations. But this would help organizations in planning since you wouldn't have to be thinking separately, or I hope we get this amendment in April and that changes things. Then, see there, unallocated funds would form an initiative fund, and there would be 2 times a year to apply for that, so one in late September and one in late February. These would be between the first and second SAP funding deadlines. Ideally, we won't then kind of be double funding organizations. They won't be allowed to double dip because they'll know if they got SAP funding by then, and then by extension, the committee looking at these initiative fund proposals will know if their proposal kind of already got SAP funded or is unique, or maybe they need funding from both locations. Yet those dates are early enough in the semester that an organization can potentially get money and be able to use it that semester, or can be planning ahead and say, okay, we're going to apply in late September for funding that we're really going to use second semester. And then we also talked about kind of checks and balances on the system, both in terms of the surplus and in terms of the standing committee of using its power. So organizations have, when they submit their budget proposals every year in April, a budget surplus. So they say, we need this much, we expect expenses of this much, and there's some difference there that is their budgeted surplus. And that's fine, that's really healthy for organizations to have, that's good financial planning. But what we don't want is them to grossly abuse this surplus line and end up way above it. So there's going to be a hard cap on the surplus. So if you're above 125% of what your budget surplus was, you definitely have to meet with the standing committee, and you can be required to return that amount unless the standing committee is like, okay, yeah, your supplier of yearbooks just ceased to exist, they filed for bankruptcy, so you still need to finish this yearbook and you have that funding, but we understand that that's not going to be possible in the timeline. So in very exceptional circumstances, you could potentially get around this, but there would be a hard cap of 125% of the surplus. And then the standing committee has a check on it in that they cannot fund an organization by less than 75% of what they funded a year prior. So the standing committee can't just say, we don't like the Thresher and what they printed this year, so Thresher gets no money next year. That would not happen in the system. And if the standing committee is cutting an organization's funding at all, there's required to be a meeting, and then there's also, in extreme cases, an appeal process to use for as well. So we've had a lot of questions about how is this committee comprised. There are 7 voting members. So it's going to be chaired by the SA Treasurer. This is really going to be one of their really big duties, especially next year, since this will be a new system. We're going to have 2 subsidiary organization officers, so those are current blanket tax orgs, which will be grandfathered over to the new system. We will then have 2 students at large, so these are not officers of approved organizations or centers. These are students interested in blanket tax and student money. And they will generally serve 2-year terms. If somebody's really qualified or there aren't enough applicants, we can get them to serve 1-year term, but they will generally serve 2-year terms to encourage institutional memory. And then we're also going to have some staff, 2 of them. One's going to be the SA advisor, and one is going to be another staff person, ideally associated with another blanket tax organization. They're going to serve 2 to 3-year terms based on the discussion with the treasurer and what they feel they can take on. And they will be voting members. And for both the subsidiary organization officers and the staff advisors, they're not allowed to be from the same organization. So UCORT can't put up both their treasurer and their chair to be subsidiary organization officers on the standing committee and kind of hope to rig the system. And then non-voting member will be the SA parliamentarian to advise and kind of guide the group through this process. So what's next? So because these are just an extensive series of Class A amendments, we would have had to have the final language in 2 weeks before, which we were not able to make that deadline, even though we've been working really aggressively on this. So we're going to be taking a different route, which basically involves getting the final language, having it approved by the SA parliamentarian, and then getting 5% of the student body signatures. So you'll probably be seeing me, other members of the committee around at your student college government meetings, and there might also be an electronic petition as well, since the SA Constitution provides for that. So we need 5% of the undergraduate student body. signatures on the petition to get it on the ballot, and then there will be campaigning for it. And a large part of this campaigning is actually going to be focused mostly on a get out the vote effort. So the main risk to this proposal is not that people vote no on it, though that of course is also a risk, but that we just don't meet the 20% turnout. And I'm personally okay, even though the committee has put a ton of time into this, if the proposal and the amendments fail on their own merit. But I'll be very frustrated, and I think a lot of other people will be too, if they simply fail because not enough people decided to vote on it. So that's going to be a large part of this campaigning effort, and then hopefully the result will be a better blanket tax system. Are there any questions? Woo!
Like regarding things of like not being able to give them less than 75% last year or 125% surpluses, what does like the institutional memory do for that? Like, is that only looking back at last year, or can like organization be cut like year and year, like, and it'd be more of like a long process?
Well, yeah, the institutional memory is also focused on a lot of other things, less those 2 points, and more how specific organizations function and where they spend their money and what's usual versus unusual. So there will be some organizations that are much more capital spending intensive. So like RTV comes to mind. They have a lot of equipment. That's primarily what they do, and they need funds for that. But they obviously don't just buy equipment at the end of every year based on the money they got that year. It's kind of a savings process and forward-looking. They say, okay, we'll probably need a new camera in 2 years on average. And so they can kind of save half of that camera each year, and that's a budget line in their proposal. But if you have a completely new group of people every year overseeing these people, it's conceptually very easy to kind of let these savings lines get out of hand, because you can just be like, oh, we just started saving for that this year, and actually you've been saving for this line for 5 years, and now you just have a huge sum of money that nobody knows what to do with. And it also ideally will prevent some of what we see currently in the same questions being asked every year about how an organization spends their money when the answer is pretty benign and straightforward. Hopefully we'll be able to carry some of that knowledge over year. Other questions? Awesome, cool. We are very close to having a final draft of the language, and then we will have petitions, which you will undoubtedly be seeing. Thanks, Arthur.
Thanks. So yeah, this is super awesome. Like this is a huge deal. It's a lot of money, and hopefully it will have a positive impact on undergraduate students. So I'm actually shocked that we're on time, but the last thing we have is a sneak peek at the elections ballot. So Austin.
Okay guys, so the petitions are in, and so this is a quick preview of what our ballot will look like for next week. We'll get the actual ballot plus all of the language for the referendums in by next week, and which you guys will vote on approving that. So there are a couple positions that are unfilled. You want to go up? The Honors Council Junior Class Representative, the Campanile Editor-in-Chief, the essay secretary, and also Sammy De Allen. So those,
I just removed my name for consideration.
So those positions will go into the second round elections, which will be happening after spring break. And then we also, I think the only referendum we have now is just the amendments to the Constitution, which we'll have written up by next week. Is that going into the?
Is it going into this election?
I thought it was through the essay, like a 2/3 vote.
Wait, what?
Oh, sorry.
Well, you don't vote on it until next week.
Yeah.
But is this going in like the campus wide referendum?
What?
The pressure? Yeah.
What, does Thresher want it to, or does Thresher want it to be passed by the Senate? Because Thresher now has the choice.
Oh yeah, let's do Senate.
Great idea. Yeah.
Okay, and then there's just a couple things. So for everyone who's running for a position, there's a meeting at Farnsworth, 4/7 to 7:30. And then if you can't make that, you can meet me at Hanson Commons this Friday at lunch. And then, so we'll be holding the SA presidential debates.
Actually, let's crowdsource this decision. This is like Kickstarter, it's super cool. Basically, we could have the SA presidential debates at.
Oh, yeah, I got an email about that. It'd be a lot easier for me to have it in Farnsworth. It'd be a lot easier to
Okay, so that's like, you're like the first donor to our Kickstarter campaign. So we could have it at Pub, or we could have it in Farnsworth. There are clear advantages to either of those. So we do have Farnsworth already approved, like we have it on Tuesday, or we could go Pub on Monday, but I don't know who actually like is the Pub, like events person, or if they're gonna charge us money, and I don't really wanna pay for it. So, it's like,
Farnsworth. We'll bring our own beer.
I just didn't hear what you said, and it's okay.
The only thing I'd say about having on Mondays, it was planned to be before like elections opened up, so people would be able to see the debates and then go. I mean, they still could just hold off on voting until after the debate, but at least doing it on Monday would be.
So, okay, so you're saying that Monday would be better?
Yeah.
So, but the issue is we can't get Farnsworth on Monday, this month, I believe.
Yeah.
So, like, any other donors?
Are there like a lot of important agenda items for the 4th? Because could we just have it on the 4th? Is that allowed? Like during Senate, like in place of Senate?
Yes.
Wow. That sounds like a great idea. That tentatively sounds like the winning proposal. Although I don't know if we're at Farnsworth on the 4th. I don't know. So we'll look into it. That was some great crowdsourcing from the ticket. Yeah. So.
That's next week.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll figure it out. Thanks. Alright, are there any announcements? Is there a motion?
Motion, second.